want Republicans dead.
Where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay?
The women with the least likelihood of getting pregnant are the ones most worried about having abortions.
On January 6th of 2021, you had tens of thousands of people peacefully protesting.
So, it's not a right-wing conspiracy theory. It's not QAnon. It's real.
Our guest today on the enemies list is Congressman Jamie Raskin. Jamie is the representative for Maryland's 8th Congressional District. He is a constitutional scholar who has absolutely been a champion in Congress of pushing back against a lot of the chaos and craziness on the Republican side of the equation in the last few years. And he's done it from a perspective that I think for a while, Democrats kind of ceded to the Republicans. It's the rule of law and the Constitution and how much they matter in our system, no matter which party you're in. And for that, I'm really delighted he's joined us today on the enemies list. Congressman Raskin, thank you so much for coming on today.
You're very kind to have me, and I've been looking forward to it, Rick.
Well, thank you. I want to start out with you made some news in the last week or so, talking about the fact that we can identify at least $7.8 million of money that flowed to Donald Trump's pockets from folks like the Saudis and the Chinese and the Russians in the prior administration. Talk to us a little bit about that report and about why that's consequential now as we go into the next election cycle.
Well, look, this was a central principle of the Constitution for the founders. They wanted our president and all of our elected officials to be faithful fiduciary servants of the American people, not Saudi monarchs and Chinese communist bureaucrats. And they understood very well the agency problem of the person who's the agent for the public going off and cutting their own deals with foreign governments, lining their own pockets, and then selling out the people. Right. Fortunately, for the rest of American history, no president's ever done that. And suddenly Donald Trump got elected, and he said he was not going to divest himself of any of his more than 500 businesses, and he would not adopt a rule that he wouldn't do business with foreign kings, princes, and states, which is what's explicitly forbidden by the Constitution unless he goes to Congress in order to get congressional consent and permission. So we've been fighting for 7 years to get this information. Donald Trump and his administration fought us every step along the way. His business fought us every step along the way. And Chairman Comer, when he came in as chairman of the Oversight Committee in January of last year, immediately told Mazars, Trump's accounting firm, that they no longer needed to comply with the judicial court order from the D.C. District Court, which was under a Supreme Court decision, which said he had to turn over this information, that Congress had a legitimate interest in enforcing the Emoluments Clause. But even with all that, we were able to get a significant snapshot of what was taking place. As you say, it's very partial. It's only 4 of Trump's more than 500 businesses. It was only for the first 2 years of the administration, not the second 2 years of the administration. And it was for only 20 countries out of 195 on Earth. So $7.8 million just scratches the surface, but it's still $7.8 million more than the Constitution allows and more than any president has ever done before. I mean, if you look at the history of it, Abraham Lincoln got these 2 elephant tusks from the king of Siam during the Civil War that he loved. And instead of just keeping them, he went to Congress and he said, "Can I keep them?" And Congress, even though they loved Honest Abe, said, "No, you can't keep them. Turn them over to the Department of the Interior." And that has been the historic practice. I mean, Ireland tried to give John F. Kennedy honorary Irish citizenship, and Kennedy was advised that it does not violate the Emoluments Clause because it's not something of material value. It's not money. But they thought that it offended the spirit of the Emoluments Clause, and Kennedy said, "I can't do it. I can't accept this." And so every other president has been scrupulous. Donald Trump, on the contrary, his business went out to shake down all the foreign governments, and the more corrupt and unsavory, the better. So the leading one here is the Chinese government, which, sniffed out in Donald Trump somebody who had his tin cup out. The murderous monarch of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And of course, that was just a pittance compared to what they did to pay back the Trumps with the $2 billion to Jared Kushner for his phony
Right.
investment fund. And so what we're talking about is a basic sellout of the American people. I do fault us, the Democrats, for not putting this front and center during the Trump administration, because everybody knows that Donald Trump is a ripoff artist, and everybody could understand the con game other than, like the Ukraine shakedown, which was real and was totally impeachable, but it was far more complicated. And this is so simple. He's been taking money, millions of dollars from foreign governments, lining his pockets, and totally transforming our system of government.
I think that's one thing that people sort of shrugged about in the beginning. It's like, oh, it's his hotels, it's country clubs, it's condos, and that's just what he does. But every other president in our lifetimes, including presidents who had significant personal wealth, like George H.W. Bush, Ronald Reagan had some decent personal wealth. Kennedy's likewise. They all respected the emoluments clause. They put firewalls in place. They blind trusted things, and this idea that we just sort of let Trump get away with it for the entire run of his candidacy and his presidency. It strikes me as one of those things where the value of the Constitution and the rule of law is observed on the Republican side for show purposes, but not for actual governance these days. They really don't care about the law, and they don't care about the Constitution, and they don't care about the appearance even of something that would violate the Constitution. It's just window dressing now. And so I think that's sort of why
you're totally right.
Yeah,
I mean, what are the
ahead.
I was just going to say, what are the characteristics of an authoritarian or a fascist political party, right? One is that they elevate the personal will of the charismatic leader over the rule of law and the constitution of the society. Another is they refuse to accept the results of democratic elections that don't go their way. And another is they refuse to disavow or they embrace political violence as an instrument for obtaining and maintaining political power.
Right.
So these are all classic hallmarks of authoritarianism, Rick. And I think you're right. I mean, it's kind of like that old broken windows theory that James Q. Wilson advanced. If you let people get away with minor vandalism of breaking windows and stealing hubcaps and shoplifting, the next thing is, people are going to be knocking over banks and gas stations, so on. And it's the exact same thing with Donald Trump. We let him get away with the emoluments clause because people said they couldn't even pronounce emoluments or whatever. And we say, oh yeah, it's fine if the president is basically in business with foreign governments. And next thing you know, he's staging a political coup and a violent insurrection against the government because he thinks the Constitution is just, a bunch of words on paper.
Well, I think the January 6th moment, and to my mind, the most consequential of the cases against Trump right now involves the January 6th stuff, because that is the most direct and harsh challenge to a constitutional order in this country, in my view. And you've talked a lot about this, and that you've examined this question a lot, obviously through the January 6th and everything else. We are still at a moment now, I think, where your colleague Elise Stefanik over the weekend called the people who have been arrested for violent crimes, judged by a court and jury to be guilty and imprisoned for those crimes. She called them hostages. I mean, how this is profoundly, in my mind, corrosive to the rule of law and corrosive to a constitutional government. I mean, is there anyone left on the Republican side in your view that is willing to speak the truth about January 6th at all? I can't find anybody these days.
Yeah, I don't know exactly how you self-identify anymore, Rick or Liz Cheney or Adam Kinzinger. I mean, there are obviously people who are within the Republican Party who woke up one day like people sleeping in the basement of a religious cult and say to themselves, something went wrong. Something is really weird, and I've got to get the hell out of here. I don't know if those people are still Republicans, but yeah, in terms of the active cult following of Donald Trump, Elise Stefanik is a good example of the utter ethical, moral, and intellectual collapse of people who are members of the GOP. I mean, so let's leave aside her appalling personal dissent for a second and just look at the assertion that people who've gone through our justice system for having violently assaulted federal officers or destroyed federal property or engaged in seditious conspiracy, which means conspiracy to overthrow or put down the government of the United States, that these people are hostages. Well, it's an outrage and it's a scandal, obviously. A majority of these people pled guilty. In other words, on their own account, they did it. And they're in prison now. The others have been convicted by a jury of their peers. But of course, since the cult master has dictated that they be called hostages, then Elise Stefanik, who considers herself the great opponent of anti-Semitism in America, except when it comes to Nicholas Fuentes, who dines over at Donald Trump's house, the renowned Holocaust revisionist neo-Nazi. She decides she's going to go along and call these people hostages. They owe an apology to the families of 130
100%.
hostages now being held by Hamas. And these are families that we've been meeting with on Capitol Hill. We have a protest I'm hoping to go to tomorrow at the Qatari embassy about the hostages if we're out of committee in time. But we're doing everything we can to get the hostages back. And here she is blurring the boundary between people who've been taken captive for a political or financial ransom with people who have gone through
terrorist group.
The American due process system.
Yeah, it's truly outrageous, and I think that moral vacuum, that moral collapse, it feels universal and it feels permanent to me, at least. So it's why I left the party.
Can I say one thing about that, Rick?
Yeah, of course.
I've got a bust of one president on my desk in the Rayburn House office building, and it's Abraham Lincoln.
Okay.
I didn't used to think of myself as an especially partisan person. Lincoln was always my favorite, has always been my favorite. He was the founder of the Republican Party, obviously the namesake for the Lincoln Project. But he created the Republican Party as a pro-liberty, pro-union, anti-slavery, anti-know-nothing, pro-immigration, pro-reason, pro-science, pro-enlightenment party. And they have reduced it to a cult of authoritarian personality. I've told some of my Republican colleagues, Rick, that when we get through this nightmarish period of our history, they will be fit only for selling incense and flowers at Dulles Airport and sleeping on the basement floor listening to tapes of Donald Trump all night. They have suspended their critical thinking skills, and they're acting like Moonies.
The cult-like aspect of it is unquestionable, and they do have. I think they do have. I mean, the irony of it all is their commitment to him is so unflinching. But as you pointed out in our very first topic, it's like this guy was here to make money. He wanted to be famous and make more money. This was a grift. It's the most successful business he's ever had, is ripping off his small dollar donors and getting foreign powers to write him checks. And it's all projection. All the stuff, Hunter's laptop, it's all projection. Joe Biden is a guy who has been around a long time. He's made a little bit of money, but not that much. This is a guy who Trump is a guy who projects all this in the worst possible way. So I wanted to jump to the subject of the state efforts under the 14th Amendment to tag Trump as an insurrectionist and remove him from some of the primary ballots that are going on right now. I want to get your thoughts on that. It's been controversial, frankly, on both sides. The Republicans are in a we'll take Biden off the ballot because of immigration, But where do you stand on that? How do you see that playing out in the coming Supreme Court case and in the weeks ahead?
Yeah, I mean, it's only controversial because Donald Trump has undermined everybody's understanding and of the Constitution and commitment to it. And look, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. I turn on the TV and I hear these Trump followers say, well, it would be undemocratic, it would be unfair to block him from the ballot because Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Really, there are more than 100 million people who can't run for president in America.
Right.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez can't run for president. She's too young. Maxwell Frost can't run for president. He's too young. There's a bunch of Republican members who are too young. It's not just age. We have 25 or 30 million Americans who were born abroad. Arnold Schwarzenegger was born in Austria. He can't run for president. Jennifer Granholm can't run for president. Those are far more morally arbitrary classifications or barriers to candidacy than you have undertaken to overthrow the government of the United States. That affects, I estimate, maybe a dozen people in the country today. Maybe a dozen, maybe a half dozen. And they have disqualified themselves, Rick. In other words, Donald Trump put himself in that situation, right? Barack Obama can't run for president again,
right?
Because he's already served 2 terms. And you know who understands the constitutional qualifications for president as being perfectly constitutional and democratic? Donald Trump, because he made his career running around the country saying that Barack Obama should not be allowed on the ballot because he was born in Kenya.
Right.
Now, he was wrong on the facts. He was lying about it, but he was right about the principle. If you're born abroad, you can't run for president. And if you engage in insurrection or rebellion, you can't be president.
It is to my mind is like one of the low watermarks of Trump as a public figure is there are people around him, and I think if you gave him the chance at all, that he would simply shrug and say, "Yeah, I'm president for life." This isn't some Middle Eastern potentate. This is an actual, American system, or at least as long as we can keep it this way. But you're right. There is we've defined it down so far. We've let it go so far of Trump's above the law. As long as he has power and the Republicans have power, everything is acceptable. It is.
That's right. And the ones he loves are like the baby-faced dictator of North Korea, who he writes love letters and Valentines to, or Vladimir Putin in Russia. He loves the autocrats and the dictators. That's the kind of government he wants us to have. And he feels like he's a dictator in his businesses, but as you're saying, his businesses have all gone bankrupt and failed, and he found his greatest grift at all, ripping off the American taxpayers. And we're going to release our next report about the domestic emoluments clause and how he was getting federal agencies and governments to pour money into his hotels and golf courses too. But yeah, that's his greatest grift, and his determination to stay in office through fraud and through violence is a reflection of the fact that he's got to keep the grift going. And now, of course, he's using it to try to stay out of business. And he, asserts this outrageous claim of categorical presidential immunity. If you're president, you can rape, you can murder, you can try to overthrow the government, and there's nothing that anybody can do about it. Which is comical, because during the impeachment and the trial, they were all saying, "Well, if there's a real crime, just prosecute him."
Yeah. Well, I also think it's hilarious that he's out putting out statements on Truth Social saying, I have absolute immunity for anything I've ever done, but when I'm president again, I'm going to prosecute Joe Biden for what? Vibes?
Yeah.
Your gut instinct. You just don't like the guy. It is the cognitive dissonance inside the Republican universe right now. And look, you and I both know there are some very smart Republican lawyers out there. And with the exception of Mike Luttig and George Conway and a handful of others, most of them are like sort of trying to keep their head down and not be drawn into what they know to be a series of unconstitutional insanities from this guy.
Yeah. Well, and I should say some of those Republican lawyers helped save us from the worst outcome on January 6th.
Yes.
Richard Cullen,
Yes.
a former U.S. attorney in Virginia,
Mhm.
really, I think, rendered excellent advice to Vice President Pence. And Pence, of course, just held the line on that day. I mean, and these days, just following the law makes you a constitutional hero.
Well, speaking of constitutional heroes, it's one thing that we started talking about this in the very beginning. I want to wrap up on this thought. You have sort of embraced this role now to not let the Republicans hold the mantle of saying we're the constitutional party, we're the party that cares about the Constitution, because it turned out that was a big lie. Tell me about how that. I mean, I think you've been a very effective voice in this, because it just has. I think it reshaped the perception of a lot of Americans about where Democrats are on the Constitution, because Republicans marketed very heavily for years. The Democrats don't care about the Constitution. They just love power. It was a massive case of projection, but you seem to be very, very happy and comfortable and effective in this role as sort of the Constitution whisperer now in the Democratic Party.
Well, hey, I appreciate that. That's high praise. You made my day, Rick. I mean, I will debate any of them anywhere on any subject within the Constitution, because they're absolutely finger painting on the Constitution and its text and its history. And if they have any respect for the text of the Constitution, for the language of the Constitution, for the history of the Constitution, for its original purposes, they have got to find that Donald Trump is disqualified by attempting to overthrow the 2020 presidential election. And they would have us believe that if Vice President Pence had succumbed to all the pressure and unilaterally declared that Donald Trump was the winner and voided out votes from Arizona, Georgia, and Pennsylvania, that Trump suddenly would have said at that point, oh, no, just kidding, really. We know that Joe Biden beat me by more than 7 million votes. I'm not going to take the presidency.
Right.
I mean, come on. If you believe that, you're too innocent to be let out of the house by yourself. This is a real political coup. He wanted to take power. Remember, the original rally that was called by the Women for America First was for January the 20th, the day of inauguration, right? It was going to be just an old-fashioned inaugural protest. Donald Trump said, no, it's not over. January 6th at 1 p.m. Get everybody there. That's where we will block the peaceful transfer of power. That all just unfurled out of Donald Trump's head. Because when it comes to, getting money and power, he is a mad genius. He has no respect for the rule of law. So, thank you for saying that. I think the Constitution does not belong to Clarence Thomas and Brett Kavanaugh and Mrs. Waterford and the people up there. The Constitution belongs to the people of the United States.
That's right.
It's our Constitution. Everybody's got to read it. Everybody's got to understand it. People have to treasure it, cherish it, and defend it. And that's our job. And, I had somewhat higher hopes for my career than just defending democracy against authoritarians and autocrats. But history plays tricks on all of us, and this is where I am. And so this is what I'm going to do. So.
God bless. God bless. Well, Jamie Raskin, I want to thank you for keeping up the good fight and for protecting and preserving this great republic of ours. And I am so grateful you came on the show today. And I really want to thank you for your time. And I look forward to talking to you again soon.
And thank you for your great work, Rick. You're an inspiration to me, man.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. On today's enemies list, whoever the asshole, Trump, Stone, incel jerk-offs were, who swatted us at 3 a.m. on the 9th of January. Look, I've been swatted before, but the circumstances are different in my life now for a lot of reasons. And the guys banging on the door at 3 a.m, the 15 sheriff's cars, ambulances, SWAT truck, the whole thing. People roaring up to the house with guns because they got a phone call saying that I'd killed somebody in my house. I've disapproved of swatting for a long time because it's happened to me a lot. All during the MAGA era, you'll be surprised to hear. I don't like it when it happens to anybody, Marjorie Taylor Greene or Judge Chutkan or Jack Smith or me. But what swatting is a part of the spectrum of political violence that has become perfectly acceptable on the MAGA right. And look, the chances are whoever did it used a VoIP or used a throwaway phone number or one of these, burner phones, and we'll never catch them. But the fact that you are of some belief that I will ever stop because you threaten me, that I will ever quit because you have the police come to my house, that I will ever be so stupid as to come out, like armed up and tooled up with the sheriff outside and get killed, you're insane. I will never stop. Now, yesterday, I tweeted two things. I tweeted the Matt Drudge cover of the allegations that there were sex tapes with Trump at Epstein's mansion, and I tweeted that Roger Stone will die in prison. I believe both of those things could have motivated these kind of people, but I don't care. I don't care what you think. I'm not going to shut up. I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to quit. I'm not going to bow down and go, oh, it's too intimidating. It's too frightening. Fuck off. Fuck right off. Now, you woke me up at 3 a.m. You woke my fiance up at 3 a.m. This was her first time at the rodeo for the swatting. Not a great night for her, but she's tough as nails and smart as a whip and knows how to handle herself. So she got it too. And if you want to try to hurt my family, you're going to do this. If you want to try to hurt me, you're going to do this. But if you're going to do this, you better understand something. You have to kill me before I'll quit. That's it. I'm not stopping. I will not stop fighting him. I will not stop resisting him. I will not stop every minute of my day putting every ounce of energy I have in the defeat of Donald Trump and his crapulous fascist movement. No chance, no how, no way. Come at me. That's it. You're on the enemies list. Fuck off.